10 men yesterday and one lady.
Oh,
So yeah.
did
So
she come
anyways,
with the doctors?
what?
Did she come with the doctors or no?
No. So actually the doctor's wife often comes. I don't know yet. They walk the show. It's about 35-40 minute walk.
Oh,
Yeah. So she doesn't always come. Okay.
right.
So interesting how this week it's planned to snow, right? I'm sure you saw in the
What?
weather. Tuesday
No.
morning. Tuesday
Really?
morning. Yeah, make sure you cover your blossoms. Okay.
We'll have to remember that. Oh, wow. I did not know that. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
I don't know in Prescott Valley and Prescott, but probably it's not going to probably just a couple degrees of difference.
Right. Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. Okay.
So this is a really loaded week. The Parsha is not the most exciting Parsha. The Parsha is a repetition of the holidays. We're in Leviticus. Yesterday we read a lot about different laws, mitzvahs the Jewish people would be adapting to. You're not allowed to marry your sister and things like that. You're not allowed to do this idolatry. That's what we read about yesterday. Yesterday, we also read about the laws of Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. We read about different mitzvahs, not getting a tattoo, not getting, all different things, which are all great discussions, fascinating discussions. The definition of a tattoo could be very broad. Is makeup a tattoo, right? These are all questions the rabbis grapple with. That was yesterday. This week, as primarily talks more about the Kohanim, the laws of the Kohanim, they're not allowed to become impure. And then it goes into the laws of the holidays. Laws of the holidays. The Jewish people coming in 3 times a year, celebrating Sukkot, Passover, Pesach, and Shavuos, and coming into Jerusalem, and the Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. We're in the midst today. It's the 28th day of the Omer. And that is the Parsha. There are a couple interesting dates to note this week, which I would like to share. And maybe I'll even share a video of the Rebbe. There's a really great video of the Rebbe that comes out every week. So this week, some weeks when it's really fascinating, I like to share it. When it's really beautiful, I like to share it. So today is the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's brother. The Rebbe's brother was named Rabbi Yisrael Aryeh Leib. Yisrael Aryeh Leib, we have a son named after him. He was a very unique man. So I was at this little Zoom farbrengen online. I have a friend who lives in Chicago, and he says there's this theoretical physicist who lives in Chicago who converted to Judaism and became a Chabad Chassid, and he has something to share. So there's not so much known about the Rebbe's brother. It is known that he was an incredible genius in Hasidic philosophy. Even when he was very young, many elder Hasidim looked up to him, with information, with understanding. Hasidic philosophy, some people have experienced it, is very deep, very, very deep. And we'll talk about that soon. He was also a mathematician. And the interesting story, he passed away from a heart attack in Liverpool, England. And he was studying in the Department of Physics. And he passed away at the age of 54. And the Rebbe actually had a certain mathematical manuscript. And you can watch in the video, the Rebbe, there was a certain chassid who was named Paul Rosenblum. You can Google him. He was one of the most famous mathematicians in America. Fascinating story. He became a Chabad chassid. It's a very interesting story. He ended up moving to New York. He was in NYU. And the Rebbe, you could see, calls him over at a farbrengen and says, here, I have this manuscript. Can you publish it? Is there anything publishable? He said, who's it from? He said, I don't want to say. So he looked at it and he said, yes, this is publishable. This is to be worked on, but you need a really expert mathematician to do this. So anyways, he ended up publishing it under the Rebbe's brother's pen name. The Rebbe's brother had a pen name because, as the Rebbe sometimes did as well, in Russia, Schneerson was not a good name to have, right? It was a really criminal name. So they would often sign letters in the name of one of their friends who died as a child or as a young man. He got married, had a child, and died. So they would sign their names in his name. And then as the Rebbe's brother left America, that name kind of stuck in the legal secular forum. That was the name he had signed off many things. So he published it, and that was the mathematics. Okay, now going back, this interesting story. There's this guy in Chicago, and he's speaking. Now, so it's the Rebbe's brother's yahrzeit. He's buried in Tzfat, Israel. And we don't know, the Hasidim don't know a lot about him. We do know that when he was living in Israel for a couple of years during the Holocaust, he escaped to Israel and he was living there for several years. He was working in a bookstore. There was no money and there was no way of getting a further education in Israel at the time. There was no, research there in mathematics or whatever it was. And that's a fascinating story for itself that this guy shared with us. But basically this guy, his wife was Jewish. He was not Jewish. And he wasn't planning on converting, but he was kind of involved in the Chabad in Chicago. And he heard the rabbi say some key lines in Hasidism, talking about God's essence and manifestations, very deep ideas in Hasidism. I actually just finished a discourse with someone. We studied it for 5 months in town here. Very, very deep, very fascinating. If anyone wants to try something like that, would love to try it, but it kind of has to be one-on-one. It's very, very deep. And, you kind of got to commit yourself to it. So, and you can't, study on one foot. Anyways, there were some of these lines that he kind of got attracted to. He said, this is almost like theoretical physics. Now, he said, in truth, this was the interesting thing I found. His name is Tom. His last name is skipping my mind, but I'll get it back for you. He said that, really in truth, a lot of this, he's a theoretical physicist. Now, he said, a lot of these theoretical physicists are also a little bit crazy. They're really very smart and they're very theoretical, but they all have, they're very interesting. And he said, the typical science religious questions never bothered him, because when you're talking about quantum physics and everything and talking about infinite and probability, those questions never really bothered him. In fact, he said he found most religions in the world to be extremely profound and have a lot of depth and wisdom in them. But when he heard the Chabad philosophy, he was kind of somewhat attracted to it. So he started studying with a few rabbis in Chicago. And one of them was a young student who was 9th grade. In the yeshiva in Chicago, they have a night every week where people can come in and study one-on-one with the students. Anyways, there are many, many famous stories of the Rebbe's brother. I will share a couple stories, that always Hasidim would talk about. When he lived in Israel, he had a childhood friend who had also been a refugee, and they were both very smart. And they used to talk Chabad Hasidism. And the Rebbe's brother had this unique quality that he would always use scientific and mathematical terms when he was talking about mysticism. And whenever he would talk and he would start using the typical Jewish terminology, he would always say, oh boy, I'm not understanding well, right? That's why I'm parroting these terms. I need to translate it into my mathematical mind, right? So, he had a friend, and one of his friends, they were once sitting across the table, and the son of his friend went to school, and they were sitting silently. He came back from school, 4 or 5 o'clock, and they were still sitting silently. He said to his dad, what are you guys doing? He said, we're thinking together. We're thinking together. So he asked them later what they were thinking about, and they were both thinking about the exact same thing. So these were real incredible geniuses. So he said, I always heard these stories and I was fascinated. Here's a scientist, mathematician who is also very, very educated in Hasidic philosophy. Here I am, I'm kindergarten of Hasidic philosophy, but I'm a scientist, I'm a physicist, right? But there was a little pamphlet printed with these stories, these little small stories. The Rebbe spoke about his name a lot of times and different details about him, but it was very mysterious. And he's looking, and it says in Hebrew, little handwritten mathematic equation from Rabbi Sorel Aryeh. So he said he's sitting there and he's reading it. And it's obviously the person who printed it had no idea what it was saying. I mean, it has all these different Roman numerals in it and everything like that. And he's reading it and he says, this isn't mathematics, this is theoretical physics. He says, why is everyone saying that the Rebbe's brother's a mathematician? So he got just inside of him, built this urge to research the Rebbe's brother. And because he said, wow, he's literally into the same. Now he said, in 1951, when this, around that time where this paper came out, or late 1940s, or the late 30s all the way to 1951, he said either the Rebbe's brother didn't write it because this was new physics discoveries from famous people. The Rebbe's brother didn't write it, or he must have been really on the verge of great discoveries with great scientists. So this is what he basically said. I'm just going to sum it up. I'm going to stand up in Hasidic terminology, but he was saying in the scientific terminology, and it was interesting. I had a lot of friends listening, and he's looking around and he says, you guys are all nodding your heads like this from Hasidism, but I'm really just speaking science terminology, physics terminology. Now, to note, he said in his fellowship, everyone works 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's not something where you just go to work and operate. It's a lifestyle. It's people who are really like thinking and everything like that. So he said, he started the basic idea. One of the basic ideas in his line of work is that our minds can grasp that there must be an infinite energy underneath everything. There must be an infinite energy creating and forming things. And there has to be a process of infinite energy becoming finite in the world. And what they use, a similar term in Hasidus, we say that God is infinite energy and God encloses things in garments, finite garments, right? So everything's really God, but we see it as garments. So he said, knowing that from physics standpoint and Hasidism standpoint, he said, wow, I wonder if the Rebbe's brother switched from mathematics to physics because this was so appealing to him, because this philosophy is already in Chabad Hasidism for many centuries. And it was a very, very interesting talk. So what he started doing is he started researching the Rebbe's brother from an academic perspective. He said it was never done before. It was always done from a Hasidic perspective. Which Hasidim knew the Rebbe's brother, but which academics knew the Rebbe's brother. So he went on an incredible adventure for several years already. But this last month, he had some new discoveries of some of the greatest physicists in the world were in touch with the Rebbe's brother. And actually, he has many theories, he has a theory, actually, which has been quoted in many Nobel Prize works. And it's called Mark Gurari's theory. His pen name was Mark Gurari. That was the Rebbe's brother's pen name. And it was just quite a fascinating discovery. And it was interesting to see how this Jew had been so moved to the extent that he became Jewish because he saw this relationship between Hasidism and Chabad Hasidus. So what was interesting for me was my friend, he didn't want it to be a lecture. The guy didn't want it to be a lecture. And he kept saying, no recording, don't pass on this information. There's just 7 people here. We know who you are. He didn't want it to be a lecture. So my friend said, oh, Eli, what are you learning? So I told him we just finished this discourse, which was talking about the exact same concepts. It was very, very fascinating. Okay, anyways, so it's the Rebbe's brother's yahrzeit. And I think that's one lesson we can take is as science and knowledge increases in the world, on one hand, we have great discoveries and there are great uses, but also the knowledge of God increases. The knowledge of God and the depth of our understanding of God increases. This is something that the Rebbe spoke about many times. He said that we have Jewish knowledge and scientific knowledge increasing at the same time, and they work hand in hand. Essentially, everything in the world is created to show us that there's a God and that God is everything. And it was just fascinating to hear this guy speak. And he said, I don't know if the Rebbe's brother ever wrote about it, but there was no way that he had studied this type of physics and did not make the correlation to Chabad philosophy. So that was a fascinating thing. Maybe we'll bring this guy to speak one day over here. He was just a fascinating speaker, fascinating. He's right now working on deciphering more papers, more works. And he didn't want to say so much, but we kind of pressured him a little bit, but he's trying to really discover the Rebbe's brother's life and what he gave to science. He died very abruptly in 1952. He said amongst his field of scientists, there's only about 1,000 in the world who are at his, level and everything. So he says a small community. He said, unfortunately, a lot of us have mental issues. So we kind of keep together. We watch each other's backs. But he started researching through the academic way and he found a trove of information. All right. Anyways, so we'll stop there about the Rebbe's brother. Very, very fascinating person. Any questions on that? His name is Tom Inbo, I-N-B-O, Tom Inbo. You can look him up. Very, very interesting fellow. All right. So he converted to Judaism through his scientific discovery. Very, very interesting. Okay. Anyways, another thing I want to talk about is tonight. So today is the Rebbe's brother's yahrzeit. Tonight is Pesach Sheini. Tonight is Pesach Sheini. Does anyone remember what Pesach Sheini is? Pesach Sheini means the second Passover. That's right. There's 2 Passovers. Who would have guessed, right? There's two Passovers. So I want to talk about that today. And another interesting thing is, so tonight is Pesach Sheini, the second Passover. It is also the yahrzeit of Rabbi Meir Balanes. Jerry, you remember Rabbi Meir? From the Talmud? Rabbi Meir from the Talmud.
Oh yeah, okay.
So he makes it into almost every few pages of the Talmud. Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi Meir. He was also called Rabbi Meir Balanes, Rabbi Meir, the owner of the miracle. Yeah, we'll talk about that story. His yahrzeit is tonight and tomorrow. And then we have another holiday on Thursday night, which in my opinion is one of the most mysteriously intriguing holidays. Because in Israel, it's possibly the most celebrated holiday in the whole Israel. All Jews celebrate it. However, probably 90%, probably I'd say 70% of the Jews have no idea what the holiday commemorates, but they still celebrate it. And even the Jews who do understand, most of us don't understand. And actually, many rabbis throughout history didn't understand either. So it's a very interesting holiday, Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. It is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And there's actually a very interesting correlation. We have two great rabbis' yahrzeits this week. One is Rabbi Meir Balanes, and the other one is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. One of them, people party like crazy over. And one of them, people historically started partying perhaps in the maybe 30s or 40s, and rabbis said, "Hey, this isn't for us. We don't party on yahrzeits of people." And they said, "What about the other rabbi in a few days?" And they said, "No, that's a special rabbi." So we're going to talk about that correlation today. It's a very interesting correlation. First, I want to talk about Pesach Sheini. So here's what the verse says, and I'll read you the verse. I'll paraphrase the verse. Anyone remember what the second Passover is? No? Come on, Steve, come on. No. Well, in the olden days, in the biblical era, people did a Seder tonight, right? Did a Seder tonight. Nowadays, the tradition is kind of down to talking about Pesach Sheini, the second Passover, and eating a little bit of matzah. Some say tonight, some say tomorrow, some say both. But it's a tradition to eat some matzah tonight to remember Pesach Sheini. Now, what happened in Pesach Sheini? So in the desert, the Jews went in the desert, right? And then they're finally done with Egypt. And now they are getting ready to do their second Passover offering. Passover offering is something that we would all do if the temple was built in Jerusalem. At least the men would have to travel. Many women traveled as well. We'd go and slaughter a lamb, right? And we'd bring this offering, and then we have a barbecue, and we have the Seder with the lamb, right? And everyone remember that? We talked about that at the Seder this year.
But why a second Passover?
I think everyone here was there. What?
Why a second Passover?
So why a second Passover? Well, the reason why there was a second Passover, so here's a story in the Bible. Moses says, everybody get ready to give the Paschal lamb. It's so exciting, right? Last year, the Jews gave the Paschal lamb, and that night they literally left Egypt. Now it's the second year. We get to be grateful to God. The first year, we're going to commemorate leaving Egypt. And Moses says, okay, everybody get ready to give a Paschal lamb. He says, if you haven't had a bris yet, if you haven't been circumcised, you can't be part of it. So a bunch of guys get circumcised, right? He says, if you're impure, if you're in contact with a dead body, you cannot give the Paschal lamb. So right away, the Torah says, there were a few men that were impure. Why were they impure? So there are different reasons. Some say they had just buried someone. You know, if you bury someone in Jewish tradition, there's no way of not becoming impure, right? They touched the dead body. They're impure. Some say, wow, it just gave me the chills. I remember last year on Lag BaOmer, actually, this week, we buried someone. Okay. So anyways, we actually touched the dead body that day. Okay. Anyways, not going to go into that now. So some say that they were holding Joseph's bones, right? So Joseph was buried in Egypt. Famous story, the Torah says, they buried him in a grave. And then the Egyptians said, wait, the Jews are going to take him away from here, right? So what do? They put him in an iron box and drop him in the Nile. No one's going to get him out of there. The Nile is a big river. So the Torah tells us that Moses miraculously gets this iron box to float, right? He gets this iron box to float. And he takes Joseph's bones. As he promised, he's going to bury Joseph in Israel. Joseph is buried in Nablus, Israel, in Shechem. People can go there maybe once a year if you get special protection. There's always fires and bombings there. It's a little bit in a dangerous territory. But anyways, they're carrying Joseph's bones. So they're doing a mitzvah. Either way, they buried someone, they did a mitzvah. They're carrying Joseph's bones, they did a mitzvah, right? So they come and they say, we are impure, right? They say, it's not fair. We can't give the sacrifice, right? That's what they tell Moses. These guys, and they're really, really hurt. Now, here's the fascinating thing. They come to Moses and they say, why do we miss out? Now, Moses should tell them, because you're impure, right? But he sees that they're not asking the technical reason why they're missing out. They're disturbed by it. It's like the emotional reason. They're disturbed. Why are they missing out? In fact, they were doing a mitzvah, right? They were impure because they were doing a mitzvah. They buried someone. They were holding Joseph's bones. Someone's got to hold Joseph's bones, right? So Moses says, okay, let me go ask God. So God goes and he tells them, Moses goes to God, and God says, tell them there'll be a second Passover, a month after Passover. You don't have to clean your house. You don't have to destroy the chametz, but they can bring the Paschal lamb and they'll have a Seder that day. The commemoration of that day is tonight. We don't celebrate it today. However, we have a few traditions. There are a lot of people who consider it a day that you have to be a little happier, right? You do some joyous things. And it's a special holiday. And you eat some matzah and you commemorate this day. This day, in fact, is very important in Jewish history. And the Rebbe drew many lessons from this day. I'm going to share some lessons, and then I want to share a video. It's a really beautiful video with a few people who had second Passover experiences. Now, one of the interesting things in the story that we find is the guys had a perfect excuse not to come to synagogue, right? Not to give the Paschal lamb. Perfect excuse. They were impure. Why were they impure? Because they were doing a mitzvah. Nevertheless, it bothered them so much. It bothered them that they went to Moses, and Moses spoke to God, and God gave a whole new mitzvah, a whole new opportunity because it bothered them so much. If they wouldn't have asked, it wouldn't have happened. So the Rebbe would always say that nowadays, first of all, in Yiddish, the term is siznidakin farfalin. It's never too late. Even if you're impure, or even if you're far away, it doesn't matter. It's never too late. But in order to tap into the energy where it's never too late, sometimes it's too late, right? In order to miraculously tap into the supra-rational infinite energy that's never too late, sometimes what you have to do is it has to bother you a little bit. You have to think about it a little bit. And when it bothers you, then you can access a new energy, get a second chance. This in Judaism is the difference between the tzaddik and the Baal Tshuva. A tzaddik is a righteous person. He gets it right the first time. Yeah, life isn't that exciting for a righteous person. He gets life right the first time. We have that when it comes to Pesach, the first Pesach, he gets it right in the last 7 days, right? The Baal Teshuva, someone who repents, he feels like something in his life is lacking. When he feels that feeling, he shouldn't lose hope. What he needs to do is access the depth of that energy. He'll go and cry out to God and say, God, I need your help. I want to rectify the situation. God will give an opportunity. This is a lesson of Pesach Sheini. God will give an opportunity. Now, how long is Pesach Sheini? Does anyone remember how many days is the second Passover? How many? 1 day. It's 1 day. He doesn't need to celebrate it for 7 days. Because when you ask God and you plead with God and you really want to change, you can do it in 1 day. It's never too late and it's beyond time. I'm going to share a video where the Rebbe talks about this. This is a really beautiful video that I saw this morning. It's from a weekly video. Let me get it right here. Let me pull it up right here. 1 second. Let me share sound as well. You know, Mendel knows how to share the sound. Share sound. Okay, now. Everyone could see this?
Not yet.
See it, Crystal?
I can see the no picture.
Crystal, you gotta just swipe your screen to the right.
Oh,
Michelle, can you see? No one can see? All right.
We did.
Do this again. Okay, here's what everyone's got to do. This thing never works. Okay. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try this again. There's two screens on Zoom. One screen is you see the pictures of everybody, right? So you got to swipe to the right, and or if you're on a computer, go view, look at the different view options. There's gallery view, speaker view. You see it?
Well, swipe to the right. Is it not going? Oh, hold it.
All right, does everyone see the screen I shared? Do you see it?
Not yet. Not yet.
All right, I shared it, so you should see it. Let's try this like this. All right, let's see. Can you, all right, let me try it like this. Okay, if you're on an Android device, if you're on an iPhone, right? You know how you have different options of how to see things? You can see everyone's face, you can see one person's face.
Yeah.
Right? So go to the one where you only see one person's face.
Okay.
Now tell me if you see this.
We see that but there's no picture. It's black. Is that what it's supposed to be?
All right,
Yeah.
let me try something else here. Give me a second.
Yeah, I got that.
All right, give me 1 second. Let me try this again. Now, do you see it?
Not yet.
Not.
All right, I don't know why it's not working. All right, well, anyways, it was a nice thought. Really beautiful video. I'll just tell you what it was outside of it. It was 3 stories about not being too late. So one of them was Rabbi Meir Lau. Rabbi Meir Lau was the chief rabbi of Israel. He's an Auschwitz survivor. I'm sure you've all seen him and heard of him. Very charismatic guy, wonderful speaker, wonderful rabbi. So he talks about how he went to the Farbrengen of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe spoke about this concept, Nidakin for fallen. It's never too late, right? It's never too late.
Ringing.
So this is something the Rebbe spoke about every year. And then it shared 3 stories. And I'll share a couple of them. One of them was a lady in Israel, and she was teaching a school for kids who were from dysfunctional homes. Anyways, when she was teaching, it was very, very difficult. It was a Jewish school, and the goal was, a lot of kids were not observant, but the goal was to get them, kind of interested in going to school and then send them off to a regular school. Anyways, she said that, she told the Rebbe, how should I do this? These kids are so hard. And the Rebbe said, just show them love. And, if you show them love, they'll love you. So that's what she did. And she said all the kids were successful. They all lived on happy lives, except for one girl. One girl at the end of the program went back home. Her mother was living with an Arabic man, and there was a lot of dysfunction in the home. So she kept trying to be in touch. And then she got a message from the Arabic man. And he said, if you continue up with this, I know where you live, I'm going to kill you. So she was a little bit scared. So she wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, now is your job. This is what you're going to do. Mix out of everything, except do you know this girl's birthday? She said, yes, I know her birthday. She said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go and say her chapter of Psalms every day. Does anyone know about this tradition? A lot of Jewish tradition, whenever you're having a hard time, or even when you're having a good time, you're supposed to say Psalms, read the Psalms. The Psalms are like one of the best ways of praying to God. If someone asks me, wants to give a class on it, I'll give a class sometime on why we say Psalms and the history of it. Yeah. But either way, everybody has a Psalm of their age, right? Psalm of their age. What is the Psalm of their age? The year you're in. So for example, Surely, my baby, is in his first year, right? So he says Psalm number 1. So it's your age plus 1. He says Psalm number 1. Mendel would say Psalm number 8, right? Traditionally, parents say this for their kids every day. A lot of times when Jews were coming to America and their kids were struggling, in the early, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, refugees were coming in, their kids were struggling. The Rebbe and the previous Rebbe, they'd say, oh, what should I do? We're looking for real help, the Rebbe would say, start off with saying their psalm. It's sometimes difficult. It takes time, reading in Hebrew and English, but say their psalm. Anyways, the Rebbe told this lady, he said, her birthday, say her psalm. And when she grows, continue saying the next one. Anyways, for 14 years, she said this girl's psalm every day. Around 14 years later, her husband was a rabbi. He was giving a speech somewhere. That's a Tehillim, exactly. And so the psalm is your age plus 1, or whoever's age you're saying it for plus 1, right? So if someone's 13, you say 14. So a lady walks up to her husband and says, are you this lady's husband? And he said, yes. She said, I've been trying to reach your wife. I don't know where to find her, but I want her to know that I got out of that hard situation and this organization helped me, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'm on my feet. I got married to a wonderful, observant family, and we have a child. So she realized that, she thought, she had to give up on this girl, but she realized, you never need to give up, and there's always another chance. So this is one of the important things in Chabad. Chabad is very into Pesach Sheini. We always believe it's never too late for any Jew or any person to be a good person, to embrace Judaism. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to do it. In fact, it makes sense not to embrace the new thing, right? If you're impure, you're impure. That's life, Do things that impure people do. Don't give a Paschal lamb. But a Jew has the ability, because every Jew has a piece of God in them, a Jew has the ability to transcend the world and set his destiny to become more Jewish and to grow in Judaism, even if mathematically and scientifically it doesn't make sense. So that scientist that I met on Thursday, he would actually say, scientifically, it does make sense. But anyways, that's because he's into quantum physics and things like that. Okay, where things that don't make sense make sense. Okay, so now here's what I want to talk about, the third subject. Let me just try to share that video. It was a really beautiful video. Tell me if you see it come up. So 1 second. I'm going to share screen. Do you see it? Does anyone see it?
Not yet.
Now the screen is shared. 1 second. All right, try one more time. All right, let's try this. Do you see this screen here that I'm drawing on?
Yes.
All right, you see what I'm drawing on?
Yes.
All right, so now let me try this, share screen. You see this screen now that I just shared, or you just see me?
You to the right and black in the middle.
All right, I don't know why it's not working. Okay.
Get Mendel.
All right, I'll get him, but Mendel, a lot of times he goes too far. He'll be here for another hour. Getting it and this and that. Okay, we don't have that much time. Okay, so now what I want to talk about is the other event tomorrow. This is the event of Rabbi Meir Balanes. I am going to try to share a different screen, and you will see. I'm just going to Google Rabbi Meir Balanes. You'll see a picture of his grave. All right, so if you look on Wikipedia, Rabbi Meir Balanes, he is not the picture of the rabbi there. That's not him, but he's somewhat famous. And now I'm going to share a screen here, and you will see him.
Why not?
All right, everyone see this? This is his tomb.
Yes.
I believe if anyone will go on the JLI trip, whenever that opens, they will have the opportunity possibly to visit there. It's one of the most famous one. I believe it's in Tiberia. It's one of the most Tiberius. It's one of the most famous graves visit of rabbis. And Rabbi Meir is very famous, and I'll tell you why. He was born. So there's difference in opinion if this is actually his history. But let me just put it short. Rabbi Meir, it says his name was really Nohorai. And the reason why he was called Nohorai was because the reason why he was called Rav Meir, there are different opinions in the Talmud, but some say it's because he brought light to the world. His wife is famous. Her name was Bruria. Bruria was a lady. There were not a lot of women mentioned in the Talmud, but she was a lady and she was a scholar. She was very, very smart. So this was Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabbi Meir is mentioned almost on every page of the Mishnah. Some say Rabbi Meir has this great story of his ancestry. Some say in the Talmud there's multiple Rabbi Meirs. A lot of times in the Talmud there's multiple people with the same name. If you ever try and research genealogy and someone says, oh, my great-great-grandfather was some unusual name, and then you look online, all the time you find that there was more than one guy with that unusual name, right? So some say this was a different Rabbi Meir, but let me just tell you the story quickly and we'll go through the history of his life. And then what we're going to talk about is how some people celebrate a big day tomorrow. Besides the second Pesach, they celebrate a big day of his yahrzeit, and some people do not. Specifically do not. They say mention it, but specifically do not. So the story goes is the Jewish people in the times of the Second Temple, there was a famous general named Neron Caesar, Caesar Neron, right? Caesar is a word in Hebrew, means like, high government official. Anyways, he was sent to destroy Jerusalem. We read this story on Tisha B'Av every year, right? We read the story on Tisha B'Av. He was sent to destroy Jerusalem. He goes there, and in Judaism, we believe that kids, the Talmud says, when the prophets died, God took the spirit of prophecy and gave it to children and crazy people. That's what the Talmud says. Sometimes children are able to point out the most unusual things. Furthermore, they're sometimes able to get to the point and predict the future, the Talmud says. And they don't even know it. You also have sometimes people who perhaps are not fully at full mental capacity. They're also able to point out eerie things, eerie predictions, eerie things. They can almost see with a sixth sense things that are going to happen. So in the olden days in the Talmud, rabbis and the like, what they would do is, we find that Mordechai did this in the story of Purim. They would call over a child and say, hey, kid, come over here. The child will come over and they would say, tell me what you learned today. Tell me a verse that you learned. The child would say a verse and they would take it as a prediction. Right?
Oh.
They would take it as a prediction. Anyways, this general is coming to destroy Jerusalem, and he does something which is kind of miraculous. He says, Jerusalem belongs to the Jewish people. There's no way a wicked guy like me could destroy it unless God would want me to, right? The Jews have such a powerful God. No enemy can hurt the Jewish people unless God wants it.
Right.
So he takes an arrow and he shoots it. Let's say Jerusalem is east of him. He shoots it towards Jerusalem and the arrow goes, right? Then he turns west. He shoots the arrow. Jerry, listen to this. This is impossible. He shoots the arrow west and the arrow turns around and goes towards Jerusalem. North, you guessed it, it turns towards Jerusalem. South goes towards Jerusalem. This guy has all the stock predictions. He knows he's going to be successful, right?
Wow.
He calls over a kid and he says, hey, kiddo, what'd you study today? So the kid quotes a verse, and the verse basically says that God will put Jerusalem in the hands of the Edomites, of Edom, the Romans, and then he'll get back at the Romans, and he'll punish the Romans, and he'll bring the Jews back up. In Jewish prophecy, the final destruction of Edom, of Rome, is when Mashiach comes. That's when the evil will be destroyed and the good will turn over, to good and become monotheistic. So he says, oh boy, I see what's going on here, right? I'm able to destroy Jerusalem now only to become punished. Whoever is going to do it is going to become punished. Who ended up doing it? It was Titus, and Titus died a horrible death, right? So he sneaks off and this guy converts. He converts to Judaism. There is a tradition that the great famous Rabbi Meir comes from him. The great famous Rabbi Meir comes from. Now, Rabbi Meir is also called Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes. Right? He's called Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, which means Rabbi Meir, the miracle worker. So there's a lot of interesting stories with Rabbi Meir. He was a great Torah scholar. He's mentioned all over the Talmud, and I'll just share a couple of stories. I'm reading out of the Talmud here. I'm paraphrasing it. So just share a story, and then I will tell you why he's called Rabbi Meir, the master, the owner of the miracles, right? So till today, there's tradition when you lose something in your life, and something's lost, you're trying to find it. You're trying to find your wallet. Jews from around the world have a tradition to give some tzedakah and say, this is in merit of Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, Rabbi Meir, the owner, the master of the miracles. And traditionally, that is a segula that is an omen to finding it, right? So that's what people do. I do it also. People always, I'll tell you that story in a second. So, here's an interesting story. I'll share a funny story, and then I'll share the story of Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes. So this is in the Jerusalem Talmud. Listen to this story. It's a great story. One time there was a guy who got upset with his wife. Why? Because she was going to synagogue and she was coming home late Friday night. Why was she coming home late? Because Rabbi Meir would give a great speech on Friday night and she would stay there. So he told his wife, he said, you're not allowed in the home until you go. You're not allowed in the home until you go and you spit in the eyes of that speaker.
Ooh.
Right? Rabbi Meir. She says, until you spit in the rabbi's eyes. So what happens was she comes and she doesn't, obviously not going to do it. That's disrespectful. It's sort of an abusive marriage, right? Rabbi Meir knows, and he has Ruach HaKodesh. He was one of those famous rabbis who had a spirit of prophecy. And he says, he sees she's around, and he said, you know, I have eye pains, and the cure to these eye pains is if someone will spit in my eye. So she hears, and he says, can you come do me a favor? And he says, do you know how to do it? He says, he says, do you know how to do a treatment? You know, they used to say different prayers. She says, do you know how to do the whispering treatment? What prayer to say? She says, no. He says, okay, well, how about this? Just spit in my eyes 7 times. That'll work as well. So she did it. And he said, okay, thank you so much. Anyways, she went home and her husband said, she said, are you going to let me in? Her husband said, did you spit in the rabbi's eyes? He says, yes, I did. So the students came to him and they said, how could you do that? Right? You're embarrassing the Torah. You're embarrassing the Torah. You're the rabbi and you're letting a lady abuse you like that, spit in your eyes. This is not about you. This is about the Torah. So Rabbi Meir said, look how important it is, the peace between a husband and a wife. In Talmud, we're studying about the sota. Remember the sota, we erase God's name, right? In the waters to drink, right? So he says, God's willing to erase his name in the water for the lady to drink in order to make peace between husband and wife. Me, I can take some spit in my eye. No one spit in my eye. Okay, anyways. So that is one of the stories of Rabbi Meir. So he was also, we see he was very humble. That was Rabbi Meir. He was very humble. There was another story. Let's find the story. All right. So there's another story. He lived in Roman rule. He lived in the times of the destruction of the Second Temple. So here's the story. So this is a story from the Talmud. The Romans, so Rabbi Meir was married to a lady named Bruria. You can Google Bruria. She's an interesting personality for herself. A lot of the feminists have used Bruria as their role model because she's a woman in the Talmud. She's very, very smart. She's a Torah scholar on her own. So Bruria was the daughter of a great rabbi, Rabbi Hanina ben Tradian. He was one of the leaders of the Jewish people at that time. So there's a story that Bruria's sister, right, was once, one second. Tell mom. All right. So Bruria's sister was once captured by the Romans. And you know what they would do? They would go and they would force her to be amongst the women who were promiscuous, right? So Bruria tells her husband, Rabbi Meir, Bruria tells her husband, she says Rabbi Meir to her husband. She says, it hurts me so much that my daughter, it hurts me so much that my sister is sitting amongst all those harlots. So Rabbi Meir took a bag of coins and he said, let her go or I'll give you money if you let her go. Otherwise, I'll do a miracle. So he said, I'm scared to let her go. The guard said, I'm scared to let her go. So Rav Meir said, here's all these coins. You take half, you pay the guards who are going to bust you, right? You pay the people on top of you half, and you keep half, right? So he said, what should I do when the money runs out? He says, call out God of Meir, God of Rabbi Meir, answer me, and you'll be saved. Anyways, the story goes, and he said, watch this. There were dogs that were Roman dogs that would eat people. Rabbi Meir took a stone and threw it to them. They came to eat him, and Rabbi Meir said, God of Rabbi Meir, Alokad de Meir aneni, God of Rabbi Meir, answer me. The dogs stopped. The shomer, the guard, saw that, and he said, okay, fine, this is what I'll do. So for Jewish tradition, for all those years, Jewish people, when they're in trouble, they say, Alokad de Meir, the God of Meir, answer me, right? So this is a pretty interesting person. He was a miracle. That's why he's called Meir Balanes, because he was able to give the ability to do miracles to a Roman guard. Now, going back, Rabbi Meir was buried in Tiberia, and Jews decided that they wanted to go and they celebrate Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's yard site this Thursday night, Friday. Hundreds of thousands of people go to his grave, and they do crazy things there. Now, what do they do there? I'll just give you some examples. When we look at the history of Lag BaOmer, we find that in early sources, it's one of those traditions that wasn't written out clearly. It's something that's been happening for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, but we don't really know what the reasoning is. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the most spiritual rabbis in history. He was the author of the Zohar. He was perhaps the greatest mystical rabbi in history. He is in our chain of mysticism. He was, we find that he was very mystical. On Lag BaOmer, one of the things we celebrate about his life is the Romans were chasing him, and he was living in a cave for 13 years with his son. What did he eat in the cave? There was a miraculous carob tree. God made all sorts of miracles for him. 13 years he was living in this cave. So he was a tremendous miracle worker. Now, one of the other things we find about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is, besides being a lot of times you have people who are miracle workers or very lofty people, but they don't know how to relate to simple people. They don't know how to relate to regular people. They don't know how to do simple tasks, right? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, what we find is, even though, one second. What we find about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is that even though he was so lofty, he was always trying to use his special powers to help people, to fix things up, to pray for rain, whatever it was. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's yahrzeit has been celebrated in Israel and all over the world, and it's a very Kabbalistic holiday. It's so mystical and mysterious, most people do not know what's going on. I just want to tell you some different customs people do. So for many years, people would go to his grave and they would dance and celebrate. This was in the 1500s, and there were many rabbis who says dance and celebrate on a yahrzeit. I've heard of fasting on a yahrzeit, being serious on a yahrzeit, but dancing and singing on a yahrzeit and celebrating with big bonfires. The rabbi, the Arizal, and many of the Kabbalists said, no, you don't understand. This is a really special rabbi. His death in the world isn't really death. He's so spiritual. He was always so spiritual. He's actually ever more present with us. So another interesting custom they used to do is people would throw in clothing into the fire. They'd throw in expensive clothing into the fire. Many rabbis erupted, and they said, this is in the Torah, you're not allowed to waste resources. This is against the law. And we actually find in the 1940s, there was a great debate between rabbis. Some rabbis said, we're not wasting resources. This is how we celebrate, burning expensive clothing. And other rabbis said this was a great dispute. Ultimately, I want to read one of the excerpts of one of the great rabbis in history, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar. Rabbi Chaim ben Attar was a rabbi in Spain who had to escape to Israel, or actually moved to Israel. He was in Morocco. And this is what he described. Now, he is an extreme Talmudic genius, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar. He was one of the greatest Sephardic commentaries on the Torah. Here's what he writes. He was in the 1700s. One time he was there near Tzfat, and when he went up to Meron is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried. And he came to the mountain where you go up. He got off his donkey and he went on his hands and feet. And he was walking on his hands and feet and making sounds like an animal, saying to everyone, how am I, as a lowly person, worthy of going into the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? He would get up and then he would dance and he would throw a lot of expensive clothing into the fire. And everyone would talk about how this great rabbi would jump off and act so wildly happy on Lag BaOmer. So here's what we find Lag BaOmer in history. Sometimes I find the greatest Jewish traditions in Judaism don't have a reason. They don't have a reason. We're not really sure why we do them. They're just ingrained in our DNA. Here we have Lag BaOmer, the yahrzeit of the most mystical rabbi in history, who helped so many Jews. And of course, mysticism was what helped us survive through exile. We speak a lot about reincarnation and things like that. The rabbis knew that if we were not aware of that and not aware that we were in the small picture and there was a much greater picture, we would not be able to survive the pain of exile. Here's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the greatest rabbis who revealed that. So what happened is a lot of rabbis said, let's do the same for Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes. Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes was a miracle worker. A lot of people call out in his name, Eloka de Meir Aneni. There's stories throughout history of Jewish people crying out for God of Rabbi Meir to help them and it working. So they said, let's do the same thing. There was a rabbi named the Stei Chemed. The Stei Chemed wrote an incredible book on Jewish law. Nowadays, there's a lot of Jewish encyclopedias out there, many, many volumes of Jewish law encyclopedias, quoting all the sources throughout the Talmud and Jewish law. But nowadays, it's not that hard to make. We have computers, we have Google, you can search, you can just gather tons of information in a second. But this rabbi wrote an encyclopedia. He was a Sephardic rabbi who became the rabbi of Hebron. He wrote an encyclopedia. Bracha has actually a grandfather who wrote the index of the encyclopedia. So he says there's no way that Rabbi Meir, you can celebrate Rabbi Meir's yahrzeit like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. If you look throughout history, so many rabbis were against the Lag BaOmer, right? They were against the customs, and the mystics nonetheless said, no, this is the most important holiday, and it's spread everywhere. This must be really a special, special day. But there's no way they would allow someone to create a holiday like this from another rabbi's yahrzeit, because there are so many interesting details of Lag BaOmer. Who would think on the holiday of one of the holiest rabbis in history, people would go out to the fields and make parades and go out to the park and make barbecues? You'd think on the contrary, you should be studying the whole day, meditating the whole day, right? But that's not what we find. We find Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was so holy, he was able to connect the highest, holiest, sublime levels of the Torah with going out into the field, with the world, seeing it in the world, seeing it in your life. So Rabbi Medini, he was the rabbi who wrote this encyclopedia. He said, Rabbi Meir was great. His yahrzeit is tomorrow in his merit. It says if you give tzedakah in his merit, it'll bring tremendous blessings to your life. Till today, people send others to pray, people go and pray by his grave in Tiberias in order for miracles to happen in their life. Very, very special place. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Lag BaOmer, there's something special about him. He was able to take the holiest, and connect it to the lowest. And that is his quality. And that's what we have on Lag BaOmer. On Lag BaOmer, what we try and do is we try and go out to the world and see God in the world more. So hope to see you all Thursday, Lag BaOmer. If you're not going to make it, you could probably watch the videos online of Meron. Meron, a couple 100,000 people go. Israel just opened up last year. It was actually kind of sad. It was the first year in many years that tons of people didn't go. They did have people go, though, because you can't stop Jews from going to his grave in Meron. But this year they're open up, and we will be celebrating and doing all those things. And it's so important to remember that we have to, on one hand, we have to use our minds to study holy things and sublime things and spiritual things and dedicate our life to spirituality. But then we have to take it into the world and use it to help people to do good things and to transform the world.
Right.
All right. Any